So what is going on, guys? This is going to be a pretty fun video here. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite old school throwback guilty pleasure horror films, the House of Wax remake. Now, when this movie came out, the critics hated it. I think the fans were overly harsh on it as well, because this movie came out during an era where we got a crazy amount of horror remakes. So comparatively, this movie kind of frustrated when it first came out. We got the Texas Chainsaw remake, My Bloody Valentine, Friday the 13th, hell, Nightmare on Elm Street. This was during what I like to call the golden era of horror that I frankly miss quite a lot. I really miss that era of horror that I fell in love with, where we would just throw on a movie, you'd take a bunch of attractive young teens, kind of a loose plot, poor acting at points, who cares? They were campy, they were silly, the kills were great, have a beer with friends and just laugh. Sometimes I get sick of this overly dramatic, serious, traumatic horror era we're in. Sometimes I just want old school fun, and I think to an extent, horror movies have really lost the plot and what a lot of old school horror fans want. So I've always really enjoyed this film because I think it does deliver on everything we loved during that era. It's gnarly, it's got some insane kills, it's got some attractive young teens, it's got drugs, it's got sex, it's got some pretty memorable gore. It kind of reminded me of the Texas Chainsaw remake, and that is a movie I love. So I don't know why fans were so skeptical of this movie at the time it came out. I think it is just so much fun. Now, before I get into the actual review, I want to let you guys know a couple of things. First off, I have done a ton of horror movie reviews, and I'll put a link to those up here at the end of the video if you want to check out my thoughts on others, get some horror movie recommendations. But I have also done a video that directly tackles my favorite guilty pleasure horror films, and this movie was on that list. So I'll put a link to that video up here now. You want to click on that, open it, watch it in the second tab, whatever, get some more recommendations, share your thoughts on all of it in the comments down below. So sit back, relax, we're gonna have some fun with this one, kind of a loose review, kind of just rambling off the top of my head. I'm gonna share some stories related to the time it came out. Let's talk about House of Wax's remake. So House of Wax is directed by Jaume Collet-Serra, and it stars Alicia Cuthbert, Chad Michael Murray, Paris Hilton, and a bunch of others. Now, this movie has a very loose plot. You're just taking a bunch of attractive young teenagers en route to a college football game when their cars break down and they get separated. As they're trying to get back together, they find themselves stranded at this odd town in the middle of nowhere. It's actually not on the map, where all of the inhabitants are wax figurines, and there's a giant infamous House of Wax that they find themselves stranded at. I have always loved the setup to this film. I think that is such a cool and creepy concept. Send them to this town where they are isolated. We don't have to worry about the police. We can suspend our logic and just have characters attacked, killed off. Crazy use of visuals here related to wax figurines and just creativity with that entire concept of this giant lifelike town. I love it, and I loved it the first time I saw it. This movie has some gnarly gore too. I always forget whenever I come back to it. This is not for the faint of heart, because this movie has to have the most disturbing visuals of any horror movie when it comes to feet. I will leave it at that. I won't spoil it. Some of them are wince-inducing. There are only two things that make me wince, truly, as a horror movie fan. I am so desensitized now. Cutting of somebody's wrists, that is just unnerving to me, both visually and what it stands for. And somebody's Achilles being messed with. And this movie might have one of the most disgusting visual interpretations of that ever. This was definitely during that B-horror early 2000s era where it was very campy, very schlocky. The directors were not afraid to offend, which is something, again, I really miss nowadays. It feels like everything has to be so concretely logical. Everything has to have a purpose, like an underlying commentary. This was just during what I call the golden era of horror, where there really was no point to the movie. You just took a bunch of people, you slaughtered them, we had fun with it. Sometimes I just want fun. Again, the golden era, why I say that is this is a movie that takes an incredibly long time to get going. It's almost 2 hours long. I don't even think there's a kill in this movie for the first hour. And it's surprising to report, I don't find it boring at all, because I miss the time when movies took their time doing nothing. As dumb as that sounds, you don't always need a grandiose purpose for what the characters are doing. First half hour of this movie is legitimately just college kids hanging out, partying, having sex, just doing all of the stupid stuff that teenagers used to do in horror movies. And the fact that the movie is structured like that both lets you know these characters characters, understand which ones are the good guys, which ones you kind of don't care about, they're going to be fodder later on. But it's also just structured in a way where it feels relaxing. Nothing super urgent here, no super deep underlying plot. Just hanging out, having a good time. We're going to get to the kills, but for the most part, these movies were almost intended for like drive-ins and barbecues, and that is just a vibe that I'll say once again, I just miss so much. I hardly ever get that vibe when I watch a horror movie nowadays. They're always so serious. Now, in writing a movie like that, you obviously have some logical jumps you need to make when you have a bunch of characters exploring abandoned buildings, going in places that are off limits. It's kind of like that TV commercial where they say, hey, let's hide behind the chainsaws. You have some moments in this film like that during the time, I don't think fans minded as much, but over the years, fans seem to be very unreceptive to that. It feels like it completely breaks their immersion. But you do have to suspend some disbelief here because you do have characters doing dumb things that set them up solely for being killed off. And aside from those major moments, I'm not going to lie, I think this movie actually does a pretty good job, above average, of characters making the pretty logical decisions here. And I have a story for you in just a second, but I think Alicia Cuthbert does a great job here as the final girl. I think she is pretty logical at most points. I think she is given a very bad hand in the direction this movie goes. But a lot of the time she chooses weapons, she strikes when she should, she hides when she should, because her paired with Chad Michael Murray's character, especially in the final act, they're pretty logical. At least I think so. I mean, this situation in general is just completely insane, so I don't know what I would do in that situation. I think they're definitely above par when it comes to slasher movies, so I really like that element of the movie. Speaking of Alicia Cuthbert, I don't know if it was just my high school or me, this woman was like every young dude's rite of passage to becoming a man. Like every guy I know, myself included, was begging their parents to rent The Girl Next Door. It's crazy to go back and watch her because I'll always know her for The Girl Next Door. This movie is like her horror breakthrough, and I always kind of forget that until I go back and rewatch it, but she's definitely good in horror. I also really enjoy Chad Michael Murray in this movie. You know, I've never watched any of the things that made him popular like One Tree Hill, but I think in horror, again, he does a pretty good job. He's kind of our token felon guy who just got out of prison. He's our tarred tough guy who's supposed to lead the group through trying times. And a lot of the time when you have a character like that in a horror movie, he gets killed off early because it's easy to obstruct the movie if he stays alive. Like he's going to fight the killer and he's going to actually know how to survive. But this movie chooses to keep him around for a while, and I actually like that because when shit hits the fan, we need somebody to latch onto. We have Alicia Cuthbert's character and his. And I think his character, for the most part, is one of the smarter survivors in horror film when it comes to fighting back, using weapons, being trained hand-to-hand combat. I feel like his character makes the right decision at nearly every turn of this movie, and I've always enjoyed that. Another thing that made this movie famous at the time, and I think it really hurt the reputation of the film entirely, was having Paris Hilton in it. She really was such a token typecast person at this era, like straight up pretty face, half naked at certain scenes. Really no point for her to be in this film at all. I do think her chase scene is pretty interesting here, along with the kill scene related to that. I think that's pretty damn gnarly. And I think at the time it came out, everybody kind of shit on this film because they're like, oh, Paris Hilton's in it. Can't be very good. Getting back to the gore of this movie though, there are 3 to 4 scenes of this I think would stand the test of time, even coming out this year at a time where it feels like we are super desensitized to violence. But I do like the way they tackle violence here because they use fingers and toes and a lot of the forgotten things that a lot of us take for granted. And those are the things that make me squirm. There's a scene in this film involving a sewer grate that I have remembered since the day I saw this film in theaters. And that is insane. Not a lot of movies I can recall the exact scene and why it happens, but I will never look at a sewer grate the same, and I never have since. The more I talk about this movie, the more I realize I might just miss the era of slashers and remakes where we got a handful of them every single year, because I don't think we have got a remake like this in legitimately 5 years. We just do not get any of the iconic franchises remade anymore, and that breaks my heart. We used to get Friday the 13th, My Bloody Valentine, and a couple of other ones all in the same calendar year. That is bonkers to me. Like the idea we got a Freddy vs. Jason movie, that's never happening again. But I think this movie delivers on everything you want when it comes to that throwback era of popcorn horror. Early 2000s, late 90s, again, that golden era. You know exactly what you're getting within 5 minutes of turning on the movie. You know the year period it was made in. Some grainy aesthetic, the lighting is not always perfect, a bunch of attractive young teenagers in cutoffs and tank tops, shirtless half of the movie, characters having sex, characters doing drugs, characters drinking, absurd, gnarly gore, dumb character decisions. This movie has a little bit of all of that. I've also always found the idea of a giant lifelike wax house to be pretty creepy. The idea that you can turn a person into a wax statue, they're alive underneath the coat of wax, that is a genuinely unsettling concept for a horror film. The finale of this movie is completely asinine as well. They have a giant house built out of wax. Literally the outside infrastructure of the house is also wax. Everything inside the house is wax. All of the people in the town are wax. Somehow they just have infinite supply of wax. That's always going to be funny to me. And I have to say this one final time, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, this is just an entertaining horror film. And I feel like horror movies specifically, and a lot of movies quite frankly, have forgotten that idea of what movies are intended to do. Sure, I am a critic to an extent. I love some commentary. I love purpose. But movies are an escape medium. They are here to entertain us. And movies like this movie during this era were just that. They were slop to an extent. They were mindless, but they were fun. And I really miss that era where you could just go, oh, that kind of sucked, but my God, I had fun. So just a silly film. I was pleasantly surprised how much I still love this movie after all these years. It will always be fun to me. So if you guys have seen this one, comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on this remake, or let me know what your favorite remake was during what I call that golden era of horror where we got a ton of them. If you like this review, my name is Sean. Like, comment, subscribe, hype the video, join the channel down below. And once again, I'm going to put a link up here to other horror movie lists. You want some recommendations? You want to talk about horror? Other than that, guys, I will see you guys in my next review. Peace.